Hello, brothers and sisters of the church. Today, I wanted to share a little bit more of an encouraging word with you in regards to how God has equipped us. And in Exodus chapter 4, verse 2, we have Moses standing before God, and God has called Moses to go back to Egypt. And Moses is reluctant of this. And the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" And he said, "A staff." When God called Moses back to Egypt, Moses felt inadequate. He questioned his ability, he questioned his voice, he questioned his leadership. He focused on what he didn't have, or rather, he focused on his own personal weakness. But God asked a simple question: "What is that in your hand?" And Moses said, "A staff." It wasn't impressive, it wasn't extraordinary, it was something that was used every day as a shepherd. He would have led the sheep with it. He would have beat off any attackers for the sheep. Moses, an 80-year-old man at the time, would have even propped himself up with the staff. He would have needed that, but he didn't see that as something that would be useful in God's hands. We often focus on what we don't have. We might think I'm not trained enough, or I don't speak well. Maybe I don't have the resources. I'm not called like others are called. But God's question remains the same. What's in your hand? What has already been given to you by God? That's what we need to consider. That's what we need to think about. Do you have a voice? Do you have a skill? Maybe relationships even that you have that are valuable. What about time? There's some people that have more time than others. Rather than wasting it, we can put it to use. What about your experience, or a burden for children, or heart for missions? I've even shared with you before, there's some people that'll say, "Oh, I'm older, and because of my physical condition, there's not a lot I can do." And I always say, you can pray then. We need prayer warriors. Are you willing to stand in the gap and pray? God rarely asks us to start something with what we don't have. He asks us to surrender what we already have to Him, that it might be used in His hands. Oftentimes, He's the one that the Lord's the one that has given it to us, but we're reluctant to surrender it and to hand it over. When Moses realized, or rather, took that staff, realizing that God had been the one to give it to him, and when he released it to the Lord in obedience, God turned that ordinary object into something that was powerful. And when we release our gifts, our abilities, our small offerings, even to God, He multiplies their impact. It goes from being something that we might have thought of as insignificant to something of tremendous value. And I want you to think about that. I want you to think about how we can surrender those things that the Lord has put in our care. Missions doesn't begin with greatness. Missions begins with surrender. And if you want to step out and be effective for the Lord, you have to surrender. We have to make sacrifices. And I know I've said this in some videos before. If you don't feel the pain of it, it's not a sacrifice. And I'm not necessarily meaning a physical pain, but if it's something that you won't miss, it's not a sacrifice, because you're just giving out of your excess. You're giving out of something that you'll never miss. The sacrifice is meaning that it's almost a burden to give it up, or it is a burden, rather, to give it up. I shouldn't be reluctant to say almost a burden. It is a burden. You're going to feel that. And I want to encourage you to look around and say, what's in my hand today? You may think it's small, but God sees it as something usable. I hope and pray that your day's going well, and I look forward to being back with you at church soon. Till then, God bless.